In the history of aviation, there were many designers who had ambitious ideas and concepts for new designs but never had the chance to bring their ideas to fruition. On the other hand, there were those who had radical or even completely impractical designs that did manage, at least to some extent, to be built. Germany had a fair share of such individuals, especially during the later stages of the Second World War. These designers may have proposed their projects out of desperation to save their country or in fear of being sent to the front. There were also those that were simply enthusiasts in aircraft development but lacked a better understanding of how aerodynamics really work. One such person was Arthur Sack, who prior to the war came up with the idea of building a circular wing aircraft known simply as the Sack AS-6. Welcome to another plain Encyclopedia voiced article. I'm your host, Tony, and today I'll be covering the Sack AS-6. If you like what we do, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single video. Prior to the war, Germans were prohibited from developing and building military aircraft. The Germans simply bypassed this prohibition by instead focusing on gliders, but also on civilian aircraft which, if needed, would be quickly converted for military use and conducted secret experiments. They especially took great care in the development and investment of manned gliders, but also scale model building competitions and organizations. While this may seem like a waste of time and money, it actually helped gain initial and valuable experience in aircraft development, which proved vital for the later Luftwaffe. One such model competition was the National Contest of Aero Models with Combustion Engines, held in late June 1939 at Leipzig, Moskau. Here, aviation enthusiast Arthur Sack presented his model of an unusually circular wing-shaped aircraft named AS-1. It is sadly unclear why Sack pursued the design of such an unusual aircraft design. Due to engine problems, the AS-1 was unable to take off from the ground, so the small model had to be launched by hand instead. The Air Minister, Reichsluftfahrtministerium RLM, Ernst Udet, who was present at the event, seemed to be impressed with this design and advised Sack to continue its development. Thanks to financial support from the RLM, Sack was able to proceed with the development and even the construction of a few scale models, a process that lasted some 3 years. In 1943, he submitted a fully operational model SA-5 to the RLM. The presentation went well for Sack, and the RLM Commission provided the necessary funds for the construction of a fully operational prototype. Interestingly, at some point, Sack came into contact with another unusual aircraft designer, Dr. Alexander Lepage. While not completely clear, it appears that Sack received design tips from Lepage to better improve his work. With the order secured, Sack initiated the construction of a prototype. He named the aircraft the AS-6 V1, 36th version. As he had no proper workshop to build the aircraft himself, the glider manufacturer Mitteldeutsche Metallwerke was tasked with this instead. The initial work for the assembly of the aircraft began in the autumn of 1943. It took nearly half a year to complete the working prototype. Interestingly, due to the general shortage of materials, the AS-6 was constructed by utilizing a considerable amount of salvaged components from other damaged aircraft. For example, the cockpit canopy and parts of the interior were taken from a Bf-109B. Once the prototype was ready, it was allocated to the Luftwaffe for initial test in the early 1944. The AS-6 was designed as an experimental prototype to test the idea of using a circular wing design. Sadly, this aircraft is quite obscure and poorly documented, so not much is known about its overall design. It was a single-seater aircraft that was mostly built out of wood. It did not have a classical fuselage. Instead, the majority of the aircraft consisted of two large circular wings. The internal design is more or less conventional, with the wooden construction frame being covered with canvas. Two large elevators were installed on the rear of the wings. The tail assembly is a conventional design as well, consisting of one vertical stabilizer and two horizontal stabilizers. The AS-6 was powered by a 240 horsepower Argus AS-10C3 engine, driving a two-blade wooden propeller. The engine was housed in a metal frame, which was then bolted to the AS-6 fuselage. The engine was salvaged from a Bf-108 aircraft. The cockpit canopy and its interior, as already mentioned, were taken from a Bf-109B. The cockpit was slightly elevated above the fuselage and provided the pilot with an excellent all-around view. The landing gear was salvaged from a Bf-109B, but in the case of the AS-6, it was fixed. Initially, a landing skid was used on the rear, which was later replaced with a landing wheel instead. Initial evaluation tests of the AS-6 prototype were conducted at the Luftwaffe Brandis airbase. The flight tests were conducted by Rolf Baltapol Junker's test pilot. While several short takeoffs were made, there were no attempts to actually take the aircraft to the sky. The test pilot noted that the aircraft had an overall poor design and was difficult to control. He urged that the control surfaces and rudder be completely redesigned. The engine was also deemed too weak. During the last short takeoff, one of the two landing gear assemblies was damaged. The AS-6, following its unsuccessful start, spent several weeks in repair and received a number of modifications in an attempt to improve its performance. This included adding an additional 70 kilograms of the weight to the rear, installations of brakes taken from a Junkers Ju-88, and repositioning the landing wheels to the rear by about 20 centimeters. SAC proposed moving the landing wheel further back, but the test pilot Rolf simply refused to fly it if this change was implemented. He argued that placing the landing gear to the rear would imbalance the aircraft, potentially leading to a tipping forward during a takeoff. For this reason, the modification was not implemented. While the engine was underpowered, there were simply no alternatives available at that time. The next test was scheduled for April 1944. During this test, Rolf tried to take it to the sky, but failed again to do so. This time it was noted that the wings were simply too short. Further tests were cancelled. The AS-6 was to await more modification and was to be tested in a wind tunnel, if possible with a completely new engine. Following the unsuccessful testing, the AS-6 was stored at the Brandis airfield. In the summer of 1944, this airfield became the main operational base for the experimental Me-163 rocket-powered aircraft. The pilots of the IGJ-400 charged with the testing of Me-163 found the AS-6. One of its pilots, Franz Rosle, expressed a desire to attempt flying the unusual plane, but when the ground crew was preparing the aircraft for takeoff, one of its landing gear units simply broke due to rough terrain, effectively preventing the test flight to be conducted. After this, it was once again stored at Brandis. It would remain there until early 1945 when it was lost in an Allied bombing raid. While not clear when, possibly during early 1944, SAC approached Messerschmitt Company with a proposal to use his circular wing design on the Bf-109K4 aircraft. The aircraft, marked as SA-7, would be powered by a Daimler-Benz 605 2,000 horsepower engine. Fitted with circular wings, it was theorized that it would be capable of carrying more armament inside the wings. It is believed, but not clear, that Messerschmitt was interested in this proposal and designated the project Me-600. Due to the war's end, nothing really came from this project. While certainly an unusual and interesting design, due to poor quality and salvaged materials used during its construction, the AS-6 performed poorly and never actually achieved flight. We will never know if the AS-6 circular wing design offered any major advantage over more conventional wing designs. It appears that Arthur Sack did not continue with this idea after the war and passed away in the mid-1960s. While his work was never implemented in mass production, his unusual design was often mistakenly taken as some advanced and secret German World War II project, which ironically it never was. This concludes our look at the SAC AS-6. If you like what we do and want to see more, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single video. Also, don't forget to take a look at our extensive collection of articles on our website, plain-encyclopedia.com. Thank you.